Have you ever wondered why someone will pay significantly more for one version of a product when another version basically does the same thing? I think we usually try to explain that with things like quality. Maybe it's better features. Maybe it's made better. Maybe it'll last longer. And sometimes that's absolutely true. But I think there's something else happening underneath all of that. Something that we don't talk about enough or at all, if maybe. And it's identity. Our identity shapes a massive amount of our behavior. It affects the people we spend time with, the things we're interested in, the way we dress, the places we go, the things we post online. And it absolutely affects what we buy. Because most of the things we buy outside of necessities of life aren't purchased simply because we need the thing. They're purchased because, in some way, they fit who we believe we are, or maybe who we want to become. And I think that second part is where this gets really interesting. Because when somebody buys something expensive, for example, they're probably going to have a perfectly rational explanation for why they bought it. This one has better materials. This one will last longer. This one has features that will change your life. This one holds value better because insert reason why. Whatever. And again, those things might all be true. But I don't think that's necessarily why they bought it. I think there's what actually drives the decision, and then there's the explanation we give ourselves that makes the decision make sense. And those can be two completely different things. Maybe you bought the expensive version because that's the brand you identify with. Maybe owning it says something about you. Maybe it reinforces something you already believe about yourself. Like, I'm a car guy, or I'm an outdoors person. I'm a professional. I'm successful. I'm someone who appreciates quality. I'm someone who doesn't buy cheap stuff. Whatever that identity happens to be, the product becomes a little badge that supports it. And once you start looking at purchasing behavior this way, by the way, you'll see it everywhere. It's hilarious. You can have two people with the exact same amount of money look at a product and have completely different reactions to the price. One of them thinks spending that much money is ridiculous. The other one doesn't even really question it. And that difference isn't necessarily their income. It could be their identity. If part of my identity is that I'm a watch guy, for example, spending thousands of dollars on a watch might make perfect sense to me. Someone else looks at it and says, my phone tells the time. Why in the world would I spend that much money on a watch? Neither person is necessarily right or wrong. They're assigning value completely different through completely different identities. I had an interesting version of this happen when I bought my Bronco. I love Broncos. A Bronco was my first car I ever purchased, so I always wanted to get another one. And the new body style, especially, I love it. It's absolutely the type of vehicle I identify with. It fits the things I like, the way I see myself, the things I want a vehicle to do, and how to look. So there was no identity conflict there. I felt like a Bronco was a vehicle for me. But it was interesting. I still had this weird feeling after I bought it. And it took me a little while to understand what was going on. The problem wasn't that the Bronco didn't fit my identity. It was that another part of my identity said I wasn't someone who could afford a vehicle like that. And it's not that the car was expensive. It's not. It was that people perceive it to be expensive, or they perceive it to be a flashy vehicle. And that's interesting, because now you have two colliding identities. There's the version of me saying, of course I'd drive this. I love it. And the other version is saying, wait a second. This is too flashy. Am I buying something I wouldn't normally spend money on for myself? The second identity was probably built years earlier when my financial situation and my life were completely different. But apparently some part of me was still carrying it around. So even though my circumstances had changed, I had changed, part of my identity hadn't caught up yet. And that starts getting into something that almost feels like imposter syndrome. Sometimes we're still operating as an old version of ourselves, and that old identity affects what feels normal, what may feel expensive, or what feels appropriate, maybe even what we think we deserve. Eventually that feeling went away because I love my Bronco. It's a fantastic vehicle. But it made me think about purchasing behavior differently. Because identity isn't necessarily just who you are right now. Sometimes we're buying for who we used to be. And sometimes we're buying for who we think we are. And sometimes we're buying for who we're trying to become. And that last one is incredibly important for marketers. And that's why you're here. People buy aspirationally all the time. Someone starts getting serious about working out, and suddenly they're buying clothes, equipment, supplements, whatever else that reinforces that I'm a person who works out. Say someone decides they're going to get serious about photography, and they don't just buy it. They start buying into being a photographer. Those purchases help make that new identity feel real. And I think sometimes the product actually helps pull someone towards that identity. You're not necessarily pretending to be something you're not. You're saying, this is the person I'm becoming. And while I was thinking about this, another thought came up that I think is worth exploring. Buyer's remorse. Buyer's remorse. There are obviously a lot of reasons someone can regret a purchase. So I'm not going to sit here and say identity explains all buyer remorse. It doesn't. But I do wonder how often buyer's remorse is actually an identity mismatch. You buy something because in the moment you think you want it. Maybe you saw someone else with it. Maybe you like what it represented. Maybe you thought you wanted to be that kind of person. And then you get home. The excitement, it wears off. And something just doesn't feel right. Or you start finding rational reasons why you don't like it. It costs more. I don't use it enough. It's not as good as I expected. And maybe those things are true. But maybe underneath all of that is something much simpler. This isn't me. The product doesn't reinforce your internal identity. And if that's true, I think that's an incredible important thing for marketers and brands to understand. Because we spend so much time talking about customers in terms of demographics. Oh, age, income, location, job title. All of that stuff is useful. But none of it necessarily tells me who that person believes they are. And that might be far more important. Two customers can be the same age, make the same amount of money, live in the same neighborhood, and have completely different purchasing behavior because they tell a different story about themselves. So maybe the question marketers should be asking isn't just, who is our customer? Maybe it's who does our customer believe they are? And then there's another question right behind it. Who are they trying to become? Because if your brand can genuinely fit into that story, you don't have to manufacture some fake reason to care, for them to care. The value already exists. You're helping them reinforce something that's important to them. And I think this is where branding becomes much bigger than marketing tactics. A great brand doesn't only tell people what the product does. It gives the product meaning. It helps someone to look at it and think, that's for people like me. Or maybe that's the kind of person I want to be. That's incredibly powerful. And it also explains why some brands can change substantially more than another company's. And it also explains why some brands can charge substantially more than another company selling something that on paper looks pretty similar. The customer isn't necessarily paying more for the object. They're paying for what that object means to them. They're paying for the way it fits in the story they tell themselves about who they are. So if you're trying to understand why people buy, don't stop at features and benefits and price, demographics, or even pain points. Those things matter in a significant way, but go another layer down. Ask what the purchase says about the person making it. What does owning your product reinforce about them? What identity does your brand support? And who does your customer get to become when they choose you? Because people don't just buy things based on what those things are or do. They buy based on what those things mean. And a lot of the time, what they mean is, this is me. Understanding people will always matter more than understanding marketing. And I hope you enjoyed this video. This is a cool topic. Leave your thoughts in the comments if you have any. I hope you'll give me a subscribe. Thanks for watching to the end, and I'll see you next time.